I'm going to take a few minutes, if I might, to celebrate something that we frankly have a chance to celebrate far too rarely, a bipartisan legislative success. I am thrilled to be here to celebrate the passage of the End Wildlife Trafficking Act, a bill that Senator Flake and I have been working on for months since it was introduced in December of last year, and an idea which we've been working on for well over a year. This bill has been a long time in coming. I first saw the tragic consequences of poaching and wildlife trafficking decades ago when I was a young man in Kenya, and I first visited Africa with a number of my colleagues on a trip to look at the dramatic increase in wildlife trafficking just a few short years ago. President Obama issued an executive order to combat wildlife trafficking back in 2013, and Senator Cardin and I held a joint hearing on the topic in 2014 when I chaired the African Affairs Subcommittee. Senator Flake, now the chair of the African Affairs Subcommittee, and I introduced this bill together last December, and now we are excited to see it pass this body and be one step closer to becoming law. Why is this bill important? Why does wildlife trafficking in Africa matter? Because nearly 100 elephants are killed every single day, so their ivory tusks can be sold on the black market. Ivory now commands prices higher than heroin or gold, and it's become one of the principal ways of financing transnational networks of terrorists and of criminals. The tragic consequences for the African elephant were recently noted in a report that showed that the population of elephants across the continent shrank by a third in the last decade. In 2014, more than 1,000 rhinoceroses were illegally killed in South Africa, a several thousand% increase since a decade before. And as rhino horn and elephant tusk command outrageous prices on the world market, the demand has driven both wildlife poaching and trafficking steadily upwards until today it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry that threatens wildlife, fragile ecosystems, and our own national security. Wildlife poaching and trafficking is one of those problems about which it's tempting to throw up our hands and say, what could we possibly do about this? It happens on the other side of the world, and it affects wildlife most of us will never see in person. But we didn't. And because of that, because of our persistence and determination, and because so many people on the committee staff here in the Senate and in the executive branch have devoted time and effort to coming up with a strategy and a pathway towards addressing it, we have lots of reasons today to be optimistic. In President Obama, we have a president engaged on the continent of Africa and committed to combating trafficking and poaching. In Secretary Kerry, we have a former senator who, when he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, dedicated personal time and effort to highlighting the issue of wildlife trafficking. And as I mentioned, in 2013, the president created a task force on wildlife trafficking that produced a strategy, a national strategy for working together to combat wildlife trafficking. And now, just today, we have a strong bill, the End Wildlife Trafficking Act, that has passed the Senate and is on its way to the House. And based on a recent conversation, I am optimistic that Chairman Royce and Ranking Member Engel of the House Foreign Affairs Committee will move this forward in the week ahead. Both Chairman Royce and Ranking Member Engel deserve great credit for passing a complementary bill, the Global Anti-Poaching Act, in the House, and it's because they have already acted on this that I'm optimistic we will be able together to reach our end goal. But what exactly does this bill do? Let me just briefly say it requires a strategy. It authorizes an interagency approach to working with the governments of many countries affected by wildlife trafficking. It produces recommendations on how to address those threats and coordination with non-governmental organizations. It authorizes the Secretary of State, the Administrator of USAID, to support efforts to combat poaching and wildlife trafficking and to encourage community conservation programs, an initiative, a direction that Senator Flake and I have seen in person on the ground in Southern Africa. It also includes strategic regular reviews to monitor progress being made, and it gives prosecutors more tools to go after individuals involved in high-value wildlife crime. And last but not least, it encourages diplomatic efforts around the world to try and reduce demand for wildlife trafficking and for the markets that consume so much of this illicit traffic, whether in China, Vietnam, Malaysia, or elsewhere. And finally, it requires an annual report back to us here in Congress to let us know how any taxpayer dollars appropriated in this fight against wildlife trafficking are being spent. This bill isn't just good public policy. In a Congress too often paralyzed by division and dysfunction, the passage of this act is an important example of what it can look like when we put good policy before our partisan politics. I want to briefly thank the staff of Senators Corker and Cardin my own staff, Lisa Hummon-Jones, who spent a great deal of time on this, the staff of Senator Flake, Colleen Donnelly and Sarah Towles, and 3 terrific people, all of them AAAS fellows who have helped bring this bill to passage. Rose Mutizo and Ali Schweer and Leah Rubin-Shen, who's moved from being a AAAS fellow to a career staff in my office and has done a terrific job getting us to the finish line today. I am so grateful for all the work of the dedicated folks here in Congress and in the executive branch who've made this possible. Thank you very much.